Open Channel D. Welcome to Cocktails in Waverly's office. I'm Logan.
And I'm Hannah.
And I'm Ursa.
Today we're going to be talking about the Deadly Games affair, the 4th episode of season 1. And just in case you don't like this, if you don't like this, content warning, we're going to be talking about Hitler, so...
I feel like phrasing it that way, just in case you don't like this. Please, we hope you don't like this.
Yeah, true. I know. I'm not saying I like Hitler.
If you do like Hitler, you probably shouldn't listen to this because we don't like you.
True.
However, this episode does deal with a Hitler popsicle that they are attempting to revive, and so we will be discussing the 1960s perception of Nazis and scientists' attempt to revive Hitler. So yes, we do have a content warning for that.
So, who can do the recap?
I can if you want. So... in this episode, The Deadly Games affair, Napoleon and Ilya are asked to investigate the sudden reappearance of a scientist who was presumed dead. The scientist was part of the Nazi regime. He washes up on the shore of a lake or river in an oil drum. He's dead, but he's less dead than they really thought he ought to be, considering they thought he had died 20 years before. By
the way, this is like a small nitpick, but actually the barrel fell out of a truck that was driving away.
You're right. There's 3 boys in a boat on the bank of a river who are watching this happen, and they're like, "Gee golly, a man just fell out of a barrel." You're right. He does not wash up from the river. He falls out on the shore of a river. And so anyway, they are investigating this, and their lead is another ex-Nazi scientist, and they are going to attempt to trace him through his stamp collection, as bizarre as that sounds. And this leads them to a college where they meet 2 college students who are looking for some quick cash so that they can get married, and they've had the 1960s equivalent of I'm a Nigerian prince, please send me money via email thing happen, where someone has sent them a letter that was like, "Hi, we're gonna send you a bunch of super expensive stamps and you're gonna sell them at auction and then you can keep some of the money." And these 2 dumb kids are like, "Oh, okay, that sounds like a great idea. Definitely nothing weird about this." And it turns out they're being snookered by Nazi scientists into selling their stamps so that they can get money to resurrect Hitler. And this, the other sort of main plot in this episode is that we meet Angelique, who is a thrush agent who Napoleon has had apparently an on-again, off-again affair with. And we sort of see how that interaction either prevents Napoleon from doing his job correctly or how prevents him from having a romance correctly. So, yeah. Did I miss anything?
Yeah, so later, Napoleon gets captured by the scientist who tries to resurrect Hitler, and the scientist attempts to use Napoleon's blood in order to...
He keeps using the phrase, fresh, whole blood.
Yeah. So now we know... Now we know that Napoleon's blood type is compatible with Hitler's.
Yeah.
This is the kind of content I never knew I needed.
Now, that may sound like a joke, but there's actually a line in the episode in which the scientist is like, "Thank God you fell into my hands, because the other people here, none of them have the right blood type to resurrect Hitler." So, yup, it is legitimately, unfortunately, canon within Man from U.N.C.L.E. lore.
Also, it's interesting that they never used the actual name Hitler. they only call him like the great leader or something. Like, I don't remember what they call him, but they never call him Hitler.
Yeah, the scientist who's trying to revive him mostly actually just uses him. Like, he says, like, I will revive him.
Yeah.
Every once in a while they say things like, you know, the leader of the regime, or like the greatest leader, or things like that.
From the perspective of the scientists, of course.
Yeah. Yes, this is not like Napoleon saying this stuff. No, Napoleon at this point is strapped to a table being like, please don't take my blood. And so I wondered about that with the not actually saying Hitler, because they do say Nazi.
Yeah.
If it was a broadcast standards thing, if it was purposefully done just to make it mysterious, if it was like, we won't be able to play this episode in West Germany if we say Hitler.
I have a theory, actually, and it kind of ties into why Man from U.N.C.L.E. has so many like fictional countries and fictional leaders and tries to stay out of real life politics as much as possible. And I think it's because they have this disclaimer at the end of it where it's like any like in the credits where it's like any resemblance to real life persons, places, events, etc., or something like that is purely coincidental. And I think they're trying to keep up that sort of like thing by doing that or something like that. Try to make it so that because they do have that disclaimer that they have a disclaimer on everything, but a lot of shows or like a lot of media doesn't really take it seriously. And I honestly think that Man from U.N.C.L.E. does.
I do wonder if Eartha.
Yeah, I have watched a documentary about Hitler being represented in the comedy over the years. And it was interesting that they saw it appropriate to make fun of him in the 40s. I mean, right, when the World War was still going on. But after the war was over, they didn't really make comedies about Hitler for about 25 years, I think. Mel Brooks was actually one of the first people who actually made a comedy about Nazis. It was the producers, and it featured
Springtime
for Hitler and Germany. Yeah, so it was 1969, and before that, Hitler was pretty much a persona non grata in American, at least, media because he was too awful to speak about. And this episode came out in 1964. It was 5 years before the producers, so it still came out in the time when it wasn't quite appropriate to talk about Hitler. So I think it was partly because of that they never used his name, but it's still very obvious that they are talking about him.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't really thought about it in terms of just like the idea of like too soon.
Yeah.
Because it is treated with. It's treated with gravity within the episode, even though it is, you know, a crazy Hitler resurrection scheme. Like, they don't act, like, it's not funny.
Yeah.
And it's treated very much actually like a horror movie.
Yeah.
And so I guess I hadn't been thinking about it in terms of, like, appropriateness of just even bringing up the name, because it was done in such a way that wasn't parodic.
Yeah, and
that makes sense.
Yeah, maybe if they used his name, actually, it would come out as inappropriate because it's like entertainment still, even if it does its best to present things seriously. It's still a bit like sci-fi, and it's not really like a highbrow entertainment. So they couldn't just bring up Hitler. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in anything where someone is repeatedly asking for fresh, whole blood, you're not, like, you're not watching Schindler's List.
That would be a strange crossover.
I thought it was really interesting we had talked about the idea of, like, how they try not to get too deep into sort of real world politics. But one of the things that I wrote down when I was rewatching the episode was that near the end, the speech from the I'm losing his name, the Nazi scientist who wants to resurrect Hitler. He says Volp. He says something like a fascist leader requires lost, bitter young men. And he talks about how, like, the fact that Germany has been split means that, like, there are lots of, like, young men who feel like everything is against them and that they're really jaded, and it's like, that's the perfect opportunity for someone like Hitler to seize power. And I thought that was surprisingly on the nose. Like, that seemed... Yeah. That seemed a little like, oh, you're just reading the fascist playbook out loud, huh?
But it's also good that they pointed it out, because the more people talk about it, the more transparent it is, because otherwise people get into this trap very easily.
Yeah, that's very true.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
Which also, makes it kind of depressing, because, the episode was aired in 1964.
Yeah. We've known this for over 50 years. Actually, probably even longer than that, because there's stuff before this that addressed that. Like, Man from U.N.C.L.E. is not, like, the forefront of academic literature, being the first to ever explore this idea of how fascism arises.
Even the fact that people don't know where Hitler's body is significant.
It's because Napoleon threw it in a fire.
I Russian officers specifically buried Napoleon. Oh my God! Specifically buried Hitler in a place where he couldn't be found, because otherwise it would be like a place of worship almost for some people these days,
Interesting.
Yeah, I've heard something similar to that.
Yeah, it was a deliberate choice on the Soviet army's part to bury Hitler in a place where nobody could find him. Nobody knows where he's buried.
I read something similar about that. I don't remember which building, but there was some building that was built during the fascist rise in Germany before World War II that ended up being some kind of major headquarters, or it was something that represented Hitler in some way. And when it was torn down, or when they were thinking about whether or not they wanted to tear it down after World War II, they decided that the best thing to do in terms of not allowing it to become a symbol for people who, like, wanted to return to that was to not only knock it down, but actually to turn the area into a parking lot. So there's nothing there. There's no other building. It's a parking lot.
Wow.
That's great, yeah.
So, yep. Do you have anything to say about this episode?
Well, there's
than zombie Hitler?
There's something that I want. Okay, before I move on, how did Volp get Hitler's body?
Doesn't he have a line like, I've been keeping it in cold storage for years?
Yeah!
So, I have to assume that, like, he was there in the room when Hitler shot himself, and he just was like, alright, dragging this out to the freezer!
Even in the 60s, there were many conspiracy theories about Hitler surviving and everything, so it wasn't that much of a stretch, I think, because people would buy it.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, there's so many conspiracy theories about Hitler, like, secretly living.
Yeah.
The funniest one is the one about the Nazi base in Antarctica. That's a weird one. Maybe look that up someday. Because it's very funny.
Wait. There's an episode of that show that you recommended, Eartha. The Australian one.
Danger 5, yeah.
Yes. One of the episodes in that, the Nazis have a base in Antarctica where they have raised dinosaurs.
No, but you see Antarctica, I raise you moon.
Nazi moon base!
Yeah.
That's why we haven't gone back to the moon, because the Nazi base is there.
I mean, as a lover of deep movies, you should watch a movie called Iron Sky. They even made a sequel already.
I've heard of this. That is the one that is actually about Nazis on the moon, right?
Yeah, I love it.
So I think something interesting is that this the first time? I think this is the first time that we've had any like male innocents actively involved in the whatever we call it, the mission.
Yeah, I think that's correct. There's two innocents in this episode because it's Terry and her boyfriend. His last name is Boskirk.
His name's Chuck.
Boskirk.
Yeah,
and Chuck is the one who actually sold the stamps. He's the one who got the letter, so technically he is the innocent in this episode. Terry's just kind of like a hanger-on. And it's interesting because he has a couple of lines where, like, he is very impressed with Napoleon and is just like, maybe I could become a spy. Gee golly, is there any room in your line of work? Which is not really how the female innocents that we've had up to this point have reacted. Yeah, that is interesting. He's our first dude innocent.
Also, something interesting that I noticed was that here's something I learned about history from this episode. Not the Nazi stuff, but this is unrelated. When I saw like the phone inside the school, like the phone booth, it never really occurred to me that there'd be like a indoor like phone booth type place where students could use the phone. But it does make sense when I think about it. And that seemed intriguing to me because I've never thought about that before, being someone who's grown up in the 21st century.
I mean, for me it wasn't that much of a foreign concept, but I guess for you it would be.
Yeah, for me it definitely was. It just had never occurred to me before. Like when I saw that, I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. But it had never occurred to me that there'd actually be like a phone like students could just use in the college. But now I'm like, oh, that makes total sense.
Way to make me feel old.
There's a long sequence in Dr. Strangelove where one of the characters needs to use an indoor payphone and he's like kicking a vending machine trying to get change out of it because they keep putting him on hold.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was probably like my first introduction to the concept of an indoor payphone, because my mother frequently showed me movies I should not have seen at like 7 or 8.
Yeah, I mean, a payphone is actually pretty interesting because at my school we just had a landline and it was free. I mean, but you didn't use it like all the time, but if you had to call your parents like urgently, you could go and ask to use it.
The school I work in right now still has a landline like that. Like when the kids need to go call their parents, they can go into the office and call. So it's not that bizarre.
Yeah, my school when I was younger, like even when I was like in elementary school, occasionally I'd have to call my parents like using like a landline phone, and they still have them at my school nowadays. So it's just the idea of the indoor payphone never occurred to me.
Yeah, indoor payphone is the weird part. Particularly because it's an actual like booth inside the school. Like it's not like a payphone just mounted to the wall. Like there's a box that Chuck and Terry go in and kiss each other in the payphone, which to me seems a little silly because, you know, you can still see through the box.
But now I'm wondering if like it's actually was normal to have like boxes in there, because I've seen like indoor payphones that have no boxes for. Like at my local library, there's a payphone that just is on the wall. But like, did they just have like a payphone prop inside a booth that they put inside the college?
That's just all the men from U.N.C.L.E. Well, also the college is really weird, too, because the college has, like, high school lockers and stuff.
Yeah, I thought it was a high school at first.
Same, and I was like, oh, these two kids should not be getting married. And I'm so used to, like, Dawson casting where the high schoolers are played by 35-year-olds anyway that I was like, yeah, that's fine, I guess I can buy them as high school. No, they actually were college students, and they just went to a college that looked like a high school.
Yeah, I low-key think that maybe they, like, filmed inside, like, an actual, like, high school, because, like, that's what they had access to. or I had, like, or I had a high school set, and that was it.
Yeah, I suspect it was probably the latter, because they filmed almost everything on the MGM backlot.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
And the hills of California, which stood in for every single mountain range in the entire world.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I saw this map from, like, the 1920s that was talking about, like, all of the locations that you can fake in Southern California for film industry insiders. And it was very interesting. I should find it again.
That's really entertaining.
Yeah. So also, I think that a very romantic scene was when Ilya and Napoleon were gazing directly into each other's eyes super intently while talking about Volp stamps. That's so romantic! No, it's not.
I wrote down the words... I wrote down the words. Napoleon sees a man's name and asks, was he Dracula? Ilya, long stare. Ilya, very excited about stamps. Yeah, there's a scene before the romantic stamp staring scene in which Napoleon is trying to figure out who one of these scientists is, and literally Ilya puts a slide up on the wall that says, like, Nibbles, Nazi scientist, date of birth, blah 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 blah, like, all his information is right there, and Napoleon is like, who is this guy, Count Dracula? And it's like, no, Napoleon, you know who he is, unless you forgot how to read.
No, but they've got to make jokes about Nazis.
I mean, the weird part is he ends up being right, because they do want his fresh, whole blood. But yeah, no, there's a lot of stamp talk in this episode. I don't know how much of it is realistic. I don't collect stamps. I don't have any knowledge on stamp collecting as a hobby. Ilya seems to have a fair amount of knowledge on stamp collecting as a hobby, and he's pretty excited about getting to go to the stamp auction. That's really cute.
Okay, so I got to...
God, Napoleon and Ilya are so cute.
I got to tell you this story.
Napoleon and Ilya are just so cute.
I got to tell you
this. Just muttering about how cute they are.
So, when I was watching this episode for the first time, I did what I think on my second day of watching The Man from U.N.C.L.E. I heard Napoleon saying that Ilya was jealous about Napoleon meeting Angelique. And
oh yeah, this scene.
Yep.
I gotta tell you something. In Russian language, there are two words, like in English, for jealousy and envy, and they are very different in Russian. So you can't say that you envy. I mean, you can say that you are jealous of somebody, or like you can only be jealous of if something belongs to you and somebody else has it. You see?
So it's like, it's more similar to the word like covetous in English. Like, you have a desire for something that you feel ownership over.
Yes, but like in English it's similar. I mean, you can be jealous if your partner goes out with somebody else or something like that. But in Russian, it's only that. And envy is something very different. So when I first heard Napoleon say that Ilya was jealous, I was like,
you know, when I had to do a double take when I saw that scene too, because like the truth is he's jealous when that's the direct quote Napoleon said in talking about Ilya. I heard that completely wrong. Instead of him just saying it, talking to Angelique, being like just trying to make himself seem like all like like Ilya's jealous of me being able to talk to you, because that's like the intended interpretation. Maybe I totally heard it as Ilya being jealous of Napoleon because he's flirting with the girl.
I mean, I feel like considering all of Ilya's reactions to Angelique in this episode, that would be the sensible interpretation of that phrase, because he clearly is not interested in Angelique.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I actually do think maybe that is a valid valid interpretation, because I just was trying to force heterosexuality onto it. Maybe it's not even being gay. It's just like being jealous of like attention or that sort of thing. Like it could just be that sort of thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be gay, even though it could very well be. So I'm trying to justify this as heterosexual. Okay, I'm trying to pretend it's not gay. So
it's interesting because I feel like you could argue that Ilya is jealous in the sense of he expects Napoleon to be more careful with the choices he's making and to keep Ilya in mind as his partner and, like, not do things that are going to endanger the mission. And, like, that would be, like, I think the least gay way you could interpret it, because you really, like, there are so many things Ilya says about Angelique that are just so hilariously mean in this episode.
Yeah.
Like, I wrote some of them down, like, when Angelique and Napoleon leave the stamp appraiser, like, she's smiling as she walks out the door, and Ilya comes in. He just kind of looks at Napoleon and says, "She seems happy. Who's dead?"
Oh yeah.
And it's like, the only way this woman could be happy is if someone has died. And then there's another one, like when they find the spider, he says something like, because there's one of Angelique's relatives.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because Angelique put a... I need to give clarification about the spider. Like, she put this flower on Napoleon's chest that had like a venomous spider on it.
Yeah. And also,
the spider is really hilarious. It is definitely not a real spider.
No, it's not
even a toy spider. It's like a black ball with like two sticks coming out of it. And Ilya very kindly swats it away from Napoleon's face and stomps on it, and then picks it up and is like, yes, this is a venomous spider, which I think is hilarious, mostly because I don't know about you, but once I've stomped on a spider, I usually can't tell what kind of spider it is anymore.
Yeah.
And also,
we should talk about Angelique.
When Angelique comes to visit Napoleon and the headquarters, it is like, you better go and see her before the place gets a bad name.
Yup. Yeah, there's the whole ending sequence, like, so Angelique comes to visit at the end of the episode, and she comes, Ilya says she's at the security entrance, but, like, she's just at Del Florio's, like everyone is all the time. It's the worst hidden entrance to a spy agency in New York. Every Thrush agent knows exactly where to go. But anyway, before Napoleon goes out to see her, Ilya comes in and says, you have a caller at the security entrance, and he says you better go before, the place gets a bad name. But it's really interesting because he smiles before he jokes, before he says the joke, and then, the moment the joke is out of his mouth, his face just goes so cold. And then he just looks at Napoleon like, I hate her. I hate her so much. His disdain for Angelique is, so much greater than any other woman Napoleon is with at any point in the show. He just hates her.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's probably because, Angelique serves as, a direct danger to the integrity of U.N.C.L.E. and that sort of thing, while most of the women that Napoleon gets with are, not related to any Thrush at all, or, any, other, actual agencies that they're against. So it's just kind of, it's, actively endangering their mission, basically.
Yeah, because Ilya said that she tried to kill Napoleon before, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it makes sense.
He says...
yeah.
Yeah, he says something like, you must tell me sometime how you are able to date a woman who would kill you without a single qualm. And Napoleon is like, I think she'd have a couple of qualms, which is weirdly dirty. And then when we first see Napoleon talk to Angelique, he says something like, I will always remember you in Switzerland, so beautiful, pointing your gun at me. And it's like, Napoleon, you make so many bad choices.
Oh, he does. And it brought us back to the scene in which Napoleon and Angelique met. In this episode, and Ilya was very jealous. I got to say that the fact that both Ilya and Napoleon are in tuxedos adds a lot to this.
Yeah, they're at an auction, so it makes sense that they'd be dressed, to the nines. But it is interesting because we usually just get Napoleon in the fancy suits, whereas Ilya is kind of more casual.
And it's funny because they stand by a glass display and they drink punch, and it's it's like Ilya was ready to have a very nice evening, and then Angelique
Yeah, Napoleon comes in and, Ilya is drinking punch, looking very handsome, and he's like, how's the punch? And Ilya's like, it just went sour. And Napoleon is kind of like, whoa, what happened? And that's when Ilya is like, oh, Angelique is here. So also, he recognizes her by sight.
Okay, if he recognizes her by sight, that means that he's had experience with Napoleon endangering missions by going with Angelique before. Well, actually, maybe they had a mission, or not necessarily that. Maybe they had a mission where they were against Angelique or something in the past, and
yeah,
you could,
or maybe there was a briefing where Waverly took aside all the agents who weren't Napoleon. We're like, if you see this woman, shoot on sight.
I'm trying to think. Did we see Waverly much in this episode?
No. I don't think
I can't
he
really
was.
recall.
I'm not sure we saw him at all.
Yeah, I can't recall him. I can only recall him in the intro.
I got to say something. The fact that they hired U.N.C.L.E for the show, and then afterwards, shortly after they started shooting the show, he was very ill for quite some time, and that's why he didn't appear in many episodes, even though he was supposed to.
That's interesting. I don't know if I noticed that the first time through, because I wouldn't necessarily have like picked up on the format where like there's usually a debriefing with Waverly at some point, but I think that sounds right now that you're saying that there's a couple of season 1 episodes where he just doesn't show up.
And they were very concerned about it because he was an old man, and they were like, what if he just can't work? But luckily he worked for all the 4 seasons. But in the very beginning of season 1, he was ill for a while, so you don't see him in every episode.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, because Elia does the thing that Waverly usually does in this episode, where he goes over the facts of the case, and that's actually really interesting to think about. Like the idea of Elia being kind of a breakout character, and like he wasn't intended to be sort of the second lead. I wonder how much like there was kind of a confluence of fate where like he happened to have to take a greater role in some of these early season 1 episodes because Carol wasn't available.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's the case in the next episode as well, because in the Green Opal affair, I remember there being a briefing with Ilya in the beginning, and in the end Napoleon also meets with Ilya. But Ilya doesn't appear.
Yeah, so that
in the rest of the episode.
That seems plausible.
Yeah. So it's funny. At the same time, I gotta say that from what I have read, they were filming episodes 3 months prior to broadcasting them. I mean,
that makes sense. I think
not exactly filming. I mean, they were in production, scripts were written and everything. So when the first episode came out on TV, they were already shooting like episode 12, I think, or 13 maybe even. So the fact that Ilya got a bigger part, starting with episode 13, and for the rest of the show, it didn't happen after the show came out. It started happening as they were working on the show, so it's interesting.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. There was something else I wrote down that I thought was interesting in terms of like early installment weirdness. One of the things that I thought was really interesting, so like we've talked a little bit about Angelique, mostly in terms of like how clearly she and Ilya are butting heads, but it's interesting thinking about Napoleon and Angelique's relationship, because it does seem legitimately more irresponsible than a lot of the other decisions he makes later on, and their dialogue is surprisingly sexually charged for 1964 television, and it's very interesting because it does feel almost more Bond-like. It's like the idea of if it's just for the purposes of sex, it's okay to be involved with someone who you dislike and disagree with, and maybe have immense moral disagreements with, and that they can kind of turn that on and off at will. And it does seem kind of out of character for Napoleon later on. So I don't know if the implication is, that Napoleon starts to make better decisions after this, or if they just, the show writers decided that maybe was a little much.
So, I gotta say that I don't think that Napoleon quite dislikes Angelique. I mean, he disagrees with her, of course, but at the same time, he respects her in in the way that he respects a good operative, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it is a very strange relationship, but at the same time, you gotta admit that Angelique is a very good character, and she's very interesting to watch. And at the same time, the fact that she didn't reappear in the show is okay as well. But if she did reappear, it would be pretty interesting. I think that their dynamics will change a lot after a while, but that never happens.
Yeah, she's introduced almost as if she's going to be a recurring character, but then she isn't.
She was supposed to be a recurring character, but she never became it because I mean there were also other characters who were supposed to be recurring. There was a villain who was supposed to reappear every once in a while, but she never came back. So it's interesting.
The show could have been very different if, like, if for the most part the recurring characters weren't just like Napoleon, Ilya, Waverly, and then Rogers in season 4. Like, if it went beyond that, this show would be very different.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, there's Heather, but like she's barely a recurring character.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I'm trying to think, like, what was the first TV show that wasn't a soap opera that had, like, an ongoing, like, continuing plot that you, like, would have needed to tune in every week to pay attention to? Like, because I feel like that whole idea of, like, recurring characters wasn't as common in the early 60s as it became even towards the end of the 60s. But just thinking, like, in terms of the idea of, like, having Angelique come back and having her relationship with Napoleon be different than it was before because the two of them have been changed by this experience, like, having that continuity, like, I do wonder, when did that really start becoming a thing consistently in television?
Yeah, it's interesting.
You don't have the answer to that. I wish I did. It'd be really nice, but I don't. I think Google might be able to help you with that more than me.
I am doing that right now. But I don't know how to sort through all of these things, so this is probably not the best thing for me to be doing while we're supposed to be talking.
Yeah. So, I have some other thoughts on Angelique. I watched really recently on the TV trope of femme fatale, and Angelique is obviously a femme fatale, but at the same time, in the movies they were usually either women who were secretly good, or they got their comeuppance in the end. So they would get killed or something like that, or arrested or something. But Angelique never had that happen to her. She came out of this whole affair completely unscathed, and it's interesting because it doesn't go according to the Hays Code, you know?
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting that she's kind of just allowed to continue being a bad person at the end of the episode. Like, they're like, yep, you're gonna keep working for the evil organization that wants to rule the world, and you and Napoleon are gonna go on a date.
So it's like the opposite of punishing her in a way, but at the same time, actually, the man from U.N.C.L.E, it defied the code many times, and it's one of the early appearances of this happening. So it's an interesting show in this way because it seems pretty wholesome and easy on its surface, but at the same time, if you go through the Hays Code and read it, you can see that the man from U.N.C.L.E it doesn't comply with it on many occasions. What are words?
Words are hard.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Also, to answer my own previous question, it sounds like other than soap operas, we didn't really start to see serialized television until the end of the 70s.
Oh wow.
So
Wow.
we're a good like 10-15 years off from TV consistently trying to do things like that.
Interesting, yeah.
Soap operas have been doing it since the radio days, though.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Man, there's been like some soap operas that have gone on for like over 50 years.
Yeah. The one that I'm reading about right now is The Guiding Light, which debuted on radio in 1937, and its last episode aired on television in 2009.
Amazing.
That's too many episodes. It was over 15,000 episodes.
Oh
and people complain about trying to catch up with, like, One Piece and Naruto.
Well, like, yeah, thing about soap operas is that they aren't really designed for you to actually, like, watch all the way through. Like, you're just supposed to be able to pick up on, like, a plot thread at one point, watch it for a while, and then when you get tired of it, you just kind of stop. Because that's at least my opinion. That's at least how I view them. Because like it's absolutely like super unrealistic to be able to watch all the episodes of Guiding Light.
Yeah. There is a show from the 60s called Dark Shadows, and it looks very interesting.
I love Dark Shadows.
I want to watch it, but at the same time, I'm so scared of its runtime.
So, we're totally on a weird tangent right now anyway, but when I was in like 4th or 5th grade, I had abdominal migraines, which meant that basically I would get a really bad headache and then I'd throw up. And it would be like 72 hours of this.
Oh my God.
So I wouldn't be able to go to school when it happened. And so when that happened, I would stay home and I would watch TV Land, which was like a channel that played 60s and 70s television at the time. And so I watched all sorts of stuff that was well before my time, including Dark Shadows, which I watched quite a number of episodes of. Homesick. It's a vampire soap opera, basically. And so, all of the tropes that, like, we think of as being, like, stuff that came from, like, Anne Rice or, like, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, like, no, they're from Dark Shadows.
Is this like Paranormal Romance before Paranormal Romance?
Yes, it's all about Barnabas Collins, who is a vampire who does not he doesn't do vampire-y things. He tries to be good. And his family and the things that happen with their group of mysterious creatures, but it's all kind of played straight, even though it's really ridiculous. But I think what Logan said earlier about, like, you're not really designed to watch every episode of a soap opera. Like, I would miss 2 weeks worth of reruns because I would be at school, and then I'd be like, oh, having another abdominal migraine, get to see Dark Shadows! And, like, you'd be able to catch up on whatever you missed over the past 2 weeks. It was fine.
Yeah. So, I don't know how would I watch it, because, it's a lot, and I don't think that I'm ready to commit as much.
It's not that good.
Yeah! But it looks fun. I think I would enjoy it, maybe. I mean, it's partial. Also, I gotta say that I'm aware of the channel called TV Land, because recently I rewatched some sketches on its channel on YouTube. There were like 4 sketches, I think, of specials with Vincent Price.
Yes.
I love them so much. I rewatch them like every couple of years, I think. They star Bill Hader as Vincent Price, and he presents all these specials, and all kinds of old Hollywood stars come, and they behave so awful. There's also
I enjoyed those. Those were good.
Yeah, there was also a recurring character of Liberace. He comes to every special and he's just being absolutely outrageous. You got to check this out because they're very funny.
Yeah, we are so off topic.
Yeah.
But also, I got to play.
How did Chuck get in school so late?
But we are actually technically secretly on topic, because do you know what they want in Dark Shadows? Whole, fresh blood. That's what it all comes back to. So yeah, I would agree, like, going back to what we were saying earlier about, like, Angelique just being a really interesting character in terms of the role she fills. Like, she is a femme fatale and yet does not suffer the fate that the femme fatale usually does.
Yeah.
And also at the same time isn't like, now I'll get married and stop being evil.
Yeah. She just goes on being evil. And
Yep. Watching the episode a second time, I feel like the first time I remember being, like, really charmed by Angelique, and then the second time around being like, oh, Thrush wants her to capture the Nazi guy so that they can take his Nazi research, and, like, that makes me feel a little less comfortable with Angelique.
No, but she works for Thrush. If you work for Thrush, you would do all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I feel like there's some Thrush agents that we meet who are kind of just like, they're villainous, but in kind of like a funny way, or like in a you love to hate them kind of way. But like anytime Nazis get involved, it's like, oh, now it's just uncomfortable.
But
yeah, that's like all of a sudden, like whenever there's an episode with Nazis, it goes from like, oh, funny Thrush villains or anything to this is real. This is real ties to real life. There's no more like Bulgaria, like guy from Bulgaria trying to penetrate Mother Earth. It's all real.
No, but at the same time, I got to say that I think Thrush was more interested in the ability to revive people and not in Hitler in particular, because Angelique wasn't interested in Hitler at all, and she was appalled by the fact that it was him. When she realized who it was, she was really shocked.
Yeah, she is given kind of that, like, out near the end of the episode where she explains basically, like, we're just here for his research, and, like, at the very end of the episode she says something like, I just wanted to get all of those boxes of files, like, that you took out of the tunnels, and so we are kind of given a little bit of a, like, alright, she's not all bad, she didn't know that this was a Nazi plot.
Yeah!
But it does feel like a little bit of a cop-out. Like, otherwise it would be really inappropriate for Napoleon to be dating her.
Yeah.
Also, I thought it was really interesting that at the end of the episode, like, so Ilya comes in through a vent and is like, I'm here to save you, and he saves them. And then Napoleon grabs the boxes of files that Volt was working on and passes them out through the vent to Ilya, and they leave with them. And it's interesting to me mostly because in pretty much all of season 2, 3, and 4, anytime they come across any sort of research, Waverly is just like, blow it up, light it on fire, throw it in the trash.
Like the ultimate computer affair. Like, this computer could do so much, but nope, just blow it up.
Every single time they're like, we found this new amazing thing, and Waverly is like, we should set it on fire.
You know what? Why they actually got the boxes this time? Because
Waverly's not in the episode. Sometimes I think, as Napoleon said in the previous episode, that maybe Waverly is in the employ of Thrush.
No, but what if Waverly is like this very old man who just hates that technology gets so developed so fast?
Waverly is like, I will never get an email account, never. You can call me on my landline, grandchildren.
He doesn't even have a flip phone. No, it's just landline.
Come over and listen to the gramophone, children. I like that idea, Waverly. It doesn't totally make sense, because we definitely see him using a computer in the series, but, whatever. Waverly is a Luddite.
I feel like over the time we will make Waverly into a complete caricature of himself.
The thing about Man from U.N.C.L.E. is that the characters are so nuanced, like the main three that are so nuanced that it's really hard to like write fan fiction of them, because it's really hard to account for all the nuances they have.
Tell me about it.
I know.
I feel like the nuances, it's interesting because sometimes the nuances are things that feel like, oh, this is a really like rounded character who has like human emotions and like behaves in human ways, and then sometimes it's just like, well, they're behaving that way because it's season 3 and everybody's stupid in season 3. Does Napoleon have a concussion in this episode, or no, it's just season 3.
That's right. Oh my! I would love like someone to try and make up some weird explanation as to why everyone was just insane in season 3. Like, is there was U.N.C.L.E. like mandating these new drugs? That's what I'm saying. They're supposed to be performance enhancing, but instead they just make you like really weird. Yeah.
I like the idea that Thrush was actually also using the same, quote, performance-enhancing drugs at the same time. Either that or, like, everyone has just had too much head trauma. Like, those... I feel like you could blame, like, concussion for a lot of the nonsense that happens in season 3. It's like, why did you make that decision? Oh, because you didn't really make a decision. You just did something without thinking about it.
Yeah.
And maybe they've either recovered in season 4, or they're going through the phase of post-concussion syndrome where you're depressed.
Oh!
Oh.
I got to say, season 3 feels like U.N.C.L.E. and Thrush just had a gentleman agreement, like, not to act really well in either way, they were like, okay, let's just have fun this year. I don't know.
Maybe there was like a new regional branch manager at both Thrush and Uncle who were actually kind of pals, and they were like, you know what, let's just lay off. And then they were replaced in season 4.
Also, one more outrageous headcanon. In season 3, Fun and Energy got married, and everyone was like,
what? Boy and Ilya got married?
Let's give them a fun honeymoon.
I feel like that would make sense for the Uncle agents being like, we are dumb now, but why would Thrush be dumb?
No, but Thrush is their biggest fans, didn't you know?
That's why they always want to strip and beat Ilya.
Yeah.
And
they carry their photos and everything.
That's true.
Yeah.
That is true.
Yeah, all the Thrush people are just like, they're just really into Ilya, so they have all photos of him, and they want to. They just dream about Ilya every day.
What if the reason that Thrush agents carry photos of Napoleon and Ilya around, it's actually Angelique's fault? Like, she had a photo of Napoleon in her wallet because she likes him, and one of the Thrush agents was like, why do you have this photo of Uncle Agent Napoleon? So, and she's like, you didn't get one? They're company issue, so that we know what their faces look like, just in case we need to shoot them. And then he was like, and he went to the Thrush branch manager and was like, where's my photo of Napoleon solo? And the branch manager was like, what? And then this just started a whole chain reaction that led to all of the Thrush agents having to carry around glossy 5x5s of Napoleon and Ilya all the time. It's all Angelique's fault.
I love
it. I think going back to how these characters are, like, generally, like, they're, like, nuanced characters, I think one of the reasons why, like, writing, like, I think their nuances is what makes writing fanfiction for them difficult, and compared to, let's say, here is a show with no nuanced characters, Hetalia. It's an anime, but all the characters are literally just caricatures of their countries. They're literally just characters of their countries, which makes for really easy writing because they're literally just a caricature, so you can just write them super easily. You're not making them into caricatures, they literally are caricatures. But with Man from U.N.C.L.E, like, the characters are, like, it's really hard to make them not into caricatures because they have so many interesting little nuances that you have to work with, and I've definitely fallen into writing them in a very caricature-like way when I have written them before.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree that they're very hard to write because it's just hell.
I think that kind of sums it up.
So, anyway.
Also, Logan, I just looked up the airing date of Hetalia, and I'm suddenly picturing you as, like, a very small child watching this. I hope that, like, you were not exposed to the vague racist caricature anime that young.
I wasn't too young. I was about 13. Like, I wasn't like 7.
Sorry, I interrupted you, Eartha. Oh no, you had just said help.
I remember what I wanted to say now. So, basically, this was the episode in which I was like, is there some subtext in this show? Because I started seeing it. And afterwards, it of course got more and more with each episode. So, if you were watching the show without knowing that there was a gay ship, what would you think about this episode?
Oh. Well, I think I still would do a double take of the jealousy line and be like, wait a minute!
Ilya's just so bitchy in this episode.
I know!
It's really, like, I feel like his behavior is very, like, 1960s, like, gay-coded in this episode. Like, the way he responds to Angelique is very, like, if he'd be the kind of character who, like, in a murder mystery, you'd find out near the end was gay and then he'd die because it was the 1960s and that's what had to happen. Like, and it's interesting because, like, he behaves in a way that is, like, he really does seem like he's jealous of Angelique. And I feel like, I don't know, like, I feel like even if I were just, if I were, you know, if I were home from school watching this on TV Land, I feel like, you know, I would definitely have, like, gotten the idea that, like, his relationship with Napoleon was different from Napoleon's relationship with him. To put it in a way that is like, like he cares about Napoleon differently than Napoleon cares about him at this point.
Definitely, like, they haven't, like, Napoleon hasn't realized that he has, like, the same feelings for him yet. He's too busy with hanging out with Angelique.
He's too busy having sex with criminals.
Yep.
I mean, doesn't that happen to all of us sometimes? No?
I can just imagine Napoleon saying that, like, as the most casual thing ever, and then just Ilya just glaring at him. Oh yeah, everyone has sex with criminals sometimes, right? And then Ilya just, oh.
Sometimes I say things that I then realize are unintentional Napoleon things. and then I start to think about the choices I've made in my life.
I think it's just the best.
Which do not involve having sex with criminals.
Sometimes you wish you did.
No, I'm good. When I look at the decisions I've made in my life, I don't usually go back and say, gosh, I wish I had done more dangerous sex crime.
Don't we all? Oh my
God. But yeah, I do think there's something to it here in this episode with how Ilya reacts to everything that I feel like is... It makes me wonder about how early on some of the writers who clearly were kind of adding in, like, queer coding bonuses, like, knew what they were doing. Like, at what point in the series were they like, let's secretly make this a little gay?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question because afterwards, if you watch like episode 7, there was a line in which Napoleon called Ilya his white knight, and it was very interesting to me. And after that, I think in episode 13, I think Ilya looks so gay coded, it's just unbelievable. And in all the next episodes until episode 16, he has like very big gay coded moments. And of course there's also episode 12, I mean the Dove affair, which is also very gay but involving Napoleon. And it's just like, what? I don't know what they were trying to do, but they certainly did something.
I haven't seen this episode yet.
The Dove Affair is the one with Satine.
Yeah.
I actually haven't seen this one with Satine yet.
Better known as Khan. What is his real name? Oh my god.
Ricardo Montalban.
Thank you, Ricardo Montalban. He and Napoleon have rather intense chemistry. It's hard not to be like, oh, this is Napoleon's other thrush affair.
No,
what is the episode?
He wasn't in thrush actually. With the say that Satine wasn't in thrush.
Wait, I thought Satine wasn't thrush.
No,
I'm so confused.
He was in a local intelligence organization, and he was fighting Thrush, and he was supposed to protect Napoleon from being captured and brought to trial by Thrush, and helping Napoleon to escape involved an opportunity of killing him. So you see, he was supposed to save Napoleon from being captured, and one option was to kill Napoleon in order not to get him captured. Yeah.
I believe you. I thought he was a Thrush agent. What was I going to say? Something about Ricardo Montalban. Oh, no. What was the episode? It's in the first season where Napoleon calls Ilya Pussycat.
Yeah, see Paris and die.
Yeah. So I do
what?
feel like
that actually happens?
Yeah.
I can't wait.
Yeah, it does. In a terrible French accent too. But yeah, I do feel like once we hit kind of like the second half of season 1, like there just start to be more sort of sort of hints dropped.
Are they even hints?
True.
Because Logan, once you watch See Paris and Die affair, you will be so shocked. I promise.
I'm actually kind of sorry I spoiled it.
Don't worry, I've gotten spoiled for some of the stuff before. Like I got spoiled for the end of the Cherry Blossom affair.
No, Cherry Blossom. Cherry Blossom is nothing compared to See Paris and Die.
It is interesting because I feel like if there was not the direct line between the people who wrote the show and people who worked on the tie-in novels, and the fact that a number of the people who worked on the tie-in novels either wrote gay pulp novels or like were involved in some other kind of part of like queer literature, I wouldn't be so quick to be like, yeah, no, this is purposeful. But, like, it's hard not to feel like it's purposeful when there is that kind of, like, direct continuity between, like, no, some of the people who were involved in, like, writing related to this show were people who then, like, later wrote actual gay spy novels.
Mm-hmm.
So, it puzzled me for a very long time as well, because how would we even know if it was like supposed to be read as gay? But at the same time, we can see that some people who were involved also saw it as gay. So what was going on? What was
Yeah.
What was happening?
the fact that a couple of the... I say a couple of the actors as if there's really any recurring actors other than Robert Vaughn and David McCallum and Leo Carroll. But apparently, like, David McCallum in particular got a lot of letters being like, "Hello, I am a man and I love you."
I didn't know this!
And he, he has said, or he had said in some interview something like, one of the things that was interesting about his character was that, you didn't know whether he was straight or gay or, I think he said something like, or none of the above, which is a great way of phrasing that. But, and so the implication kind of being that, like, even pretty early on, at least, he knew that, like, his character might be interpreted in that way, too.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You just will never know. Oh boy. I mean, at the same time, we are the active fandom of the show, and who else will be the... I mean, we are the people who will be seen as expert by future people who come to the show. So we can basically say anything we like.
No, I will try to find a source for this because it was something I did actually read that was not
I've read
a suspicious website.
I've read it too. It's in like a magazine.
No, I don't doubt the quote because I also have read, but I mean, I'm talking about the fact that if we say that, say, subtext was very prominent, and I mean it was, who is there to say that we are wrong at this point?
It's easy to talk about death of the author when, like, the authors are probably literally dead.
Yeah. We can't go and ask them.
We can literally rewrite this if we want, because we are we are the people who, I just tried to look up something about Ricardo Montalban and found a picture of him being beaten in a boxing ring. Sorry, I just distracted myself finding information. Not in, like, a sexy way, like, just I was surprised that there he was with blood on him.
Oh no!
Oh my God.
Don't beat up Ricardo Montalban. I'm sorry, I derailed the conversation. Continue.
Yeah, I guess we will talk about Ricardo Montalban later when we get to the Java Fair, actually.
Yeah. Yes.
So,
and then we'll talk about him again when we get to the one with the man who
King of Diamonds
does crime. I think that might be a sign that I've been up too long.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure there's a man who does crime in every episode. That's kind of what the show's about.
Yeah, man who do crime.
That was the original title, and then they just decided that they'd never get it on TV.
The man who crime. Okay, so
do we have any thoughts to perhaps wrap up our discussion of the Deadly Games Affair? Jesus Christ, I can't talk anymore.
Well, this was an interesting episode that addressed like both the ideas of the ideas of how Nazis were perceived in the 60s and like Nazi ideas, as well as Napoleon's life with relationship with a thrush agent.
Yeah, I feel like within this is episode 4 of the show, and it's like some of the stuff that we've already had happen in the show.
It's
in some
5.
ways, it's like there's kind of some tonal whiplash. Like, you have like the previous episode being about like piracy and like survivalists, and you have the episode before that like dealing with like farm people, and I don't know where I'm going with this, but it's interesting in terms of like how varied the plot lines are at this point in the series, like going from again, without necessarily getting like immediately political, they do deal with a lot of different kind of big ideas, and I feel like that's something that makes it interesting from episode to episode.
Yeah, it really does, because you never know what you're gonna get in the next episode.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you really never do.
that is true. You really never do.
You might be dancing with a gorilla.
Or you might have a mole man offering you cold turkey soup. Or you might have a Nazi scientist trying to make a Hitler zombie with fresh, whole blood. So, yeah, next week would be, what's the episode after this one?
So, next week we could talk about 2 episodes, because it would be better this way, I think, because the next episode, the Green Opal affair, it's not that, interesting, but at the same time, it still deserves a conversation, because my favorite character appears in it, and it's Edward Applegate. And then the next episode is called The Choco Piano Affair, and it will be the episode in which Marion Raven, Gervais Savelle, and Harold Bufferton, they all come back.
Oh yeah, it's one of like 3 episodes in the series in which there is actually a callback to a previous episode.
Yeah.
All right. So next week we will talk on those 2 episodes, Green Opal and the Giacomo Piano Affair.
Goodbye. Thank you for listening.
Giacomo Piano sounds very funny. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's actually called Choco Piano.
Oh god, I added an extra syllable. I'm telling you, I'm losing my mind.
Okay.
I feel like there's going to be yeah. Alright. Next week I will have made sure to have slept the whole night before we record the episode of our podcast. And alright, we're signing off.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.